The crack of rifle fire split the Dakota morning like the sound of bones breaking. Chief Wicasa froze in his crouch behind the sagebrush, the wounded deer he'd been tracking forgotten as 3 more shots echoed across the endless grassland. Then came the screaming, high, desperate voices that could only belong to children. The sound struck him like a physical blow, dragging him back to that terrible December morning at Wounded Knee 3 years past. His 8-year-old daughter Ayana's face flashed before his eyes, her mouth open in a silent scream as a cavalry saber cut her down her small body, crumpling into the blood-stained snow while soldiers laughed. His wife Winona had died trying to shield their child, taking 3 bullets in the chest before she fell across Ayana's lifeless form. At 34, Wicasa carried those deaths like stones in his chest. He had chosen exile over the reservation afterward, unable to bear the sight of his broken people accepting government handouts from the same men who had slaughtered their families. But now, hearing children's terror echoing across the plains, every protective instinct blazed to life. Moving silent as a hunting wolf through the buffalo grass, he approached the source of the screams. In a natural depression where stunted cottonwoods offered the only shade for miles, he saw them 2 white girls bound with rough rope and gagged with dirty cloth. The older one, blonde-haired and perhaps 12 years old, was trying desperately to shield her younger sister, despite being trussed like a turkey for slaughter. 2 men stood over them, outlaws, by their unwashed appearance and cruel eyes. The taller one missing half his teeth to rot, and violence yanked the smaller girl upright by her dark hair. "Quit squirming, little rabbit." He snarled, whiskey thick on his breath. "You got a long ride ahead, and we need you pretty for your mama." His companion, a scarred brute built like a bull, was loading supplies into a weathered wagon. "Just get 'em tied down proper, Jake. Henderson promised us good money for this job, 10,000 each, if we can squeeze that inheritance out of his woman." Wicasa's blood turned to ice. The older girl's eyes, blue as summer sky and bright with intelligence, went wide with recognition at the name. She knew. Somehow this child understood that her own father had orchestrated her kidnapping. Henderson's been planning this for months. The scarred man continued checking his pistol loads. "Says his wife's got 20,000 sitting in the bank from her dead folks. Soon as she pays his gambling debts, we all get rich and disappear into Mexico." The blonde girl, Emma Jake called her, made a muffled sound behind her gag. Her younger sister, maybe 10 years old, with brown hair and eyes that reminded Wicasa painfully of his own lost daughter, pressed against her desperately. "Of course, if Mama don't cooperate." Jake leered. "We can always sell these little doves to them boys down in Sonora. They pay good money for young white flesh." That was enough. Wicasa's bow was in his hands before conscious thought formed muscle memory perfected through decades of hunting both animals and men. The arrow took Jake through the throat before he could draw another breath. He dropped his whiskey bottle, clawed at the wooden shaft protruding from his neck, and toppled backward in a spray of blood and cheap liquor. The scarred man spun toward the sound hand, falling to his gun, but Wicasa was already moving. The second arrow caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him sideways and spoiling his draw. He managed to clear leather, but his shot went wild, the bullet singing harmlessly over the warrior's head. "Goddamn Injun!" he screamed, stumbling toward his horse while blood seeped between his fingers. "This ain't over. Henderson's paying us 20,000 for them girls, and by Christ, we'll collect—" He hauled himself into the saddle one-handed and spurred his mount into a panicked gallop across the plains, leaving a trail of crimson drops in the dust. Wicasa let him escape. Wounded men talked when cornered, and their words sometimes led to bigger prey. The girls stared at him with expressions that cycled rapidly between terror, confusion, and desperate hope. Wicasa approached slowly, his weathered hands gentle as he cut their bonds with his hunting knife. "Easy, little sisters," he said softly in careful English, learned from traders and missionaries. "The bad men cannot hurt you while I draw breath." Emma rubbed circulation back into her wrists, studying his face with the sharp intelligence of a child, forced to mature beyond her years. "Are you going to hurt us too?" I have sworn to protect children, not harm them. He offered water from his deerskin pouch, watching as she drank deeply before helping her sister. Tell me your names. I'm Emma Henderson. She replied, her voice hoarse from the gag. This is Clara. Those men, they said Papa sent them. Fresh tears carved tracks through the dust on her cheeks. But Papa left us 2 summers ago. He owed money for gambling and had to go away. Clara nodded miserably, finding her voice at last. Papa said he'd come back when he got rich. He promised to take us to Denver and buy us fancy dresses. But Mama cried when he left. She said he loved cards more than his family. The pieces were forming a picture in Wikasa's mind, a family destroyed by one man's weakness, children abandoned to pay for their father's sins. In his own culture, such betrayal marked a man as less than human, unworthy of the breath in his lungs. Your mother, he said carefully. Tell me about her. Emma's face brightened slightly despite their circumstances. Mama works real hard. She takes in sewing and sells vegetables from our garden. She never complains, even when things get bad. The girl's voice dropped to a whisper. Grandpa and Grandma left her money when they died, $20,000. Mama keeps it in the bank for emergencies. She says it's our future. $20,000. Enough to tempt desperate men to unspeakable acts, enough for John Henderson to sacrifice his own children's safety. Before Papa left, Clara added quietly, he kept asking Mama about the money. He said if we just used some of it, he could pay his debts and everything would be fine. But Mama said no, it was for our education and the farm. Papa got real angry. Emma continued. He said Mama was selfish, that she cared more about dead folks than her living husband. Then one night he was gone, and we found a note saying he'd be back when he figured out how to get what the family needed. The children's words painted a clear picture of John Henderson's descent into desperation and betrayal. A gambling man who had lost everything, including his moral compass, and now saw his own family as nothing more than assets to be liquidated. We need to get you home. Wikasa decided studying storm clouds, building on the western horizon. Can you walk 5 miles? Both girls nodded, though Clara still trembled like a leaf in autumn wind. They gathered what supplies the outlaws had abandoned, jerky, a half-empty canteen ammunition for Jake's pistol, which Wikasa claimed. It wasn't much, but it would have to suffice for the dangerous journey ahead. The walk to Cold Creek stretched before them like a gauntlet of hidden perils. The sun climbed mercilessly, while thunderheads massed in the west, promising either blessed relief or deadly storms. Dust devils danced across the grassland, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with approaching violence. Why are you helping us? Emma asked during their first rest stop, her young voice heavy with recent betrayals. Most Indians don't much like white people. Wikasa was quiet for a long moment, watching Clara doze fitfully against her sister's shoulder. How could he explain that the sight of threatened children had torn open old wounds, that he saw his lost daughter's face in theirs and could no more abandon them than deny his own blood? Good hearts and evil hearts come in all colors, he said finally. A man chooses which he follows. I choose to protect those who cannot protect themselves. As they continued walking, Emma began talking more freely, her natural courage reasserting itself. She told him about their small farm outside Cold Creek, about their mother who worked from dawn to dusk, keeping them fed and clothed. About their dog Rex, who had tried to fight the kidnappers until Jake kicked him unconscious. About the quiet strength it took to face each day in a world that seemed determined to take everything from them. Papa wasn't always bad, Emma said as they crested a low hill. Before the gambling got bad, he used to take us fishing. He'd tell stories about striking it rich someday, buying Mama pretty dresses and us a big house in Denver. What changed him? Wikasa asked, though he suspected the answer. He met some men from White River who played cards for big stakes. Clara answered, now walking steadily despite her exhaustion. They said Papa was lucky that he could win enough to solve all our problems. But he kept losing instead. Every time he came home, he'd promise Mama it was the last time. Emma continued bitterly. Said the next game would be different, that he'd win back everything and more. But he never did. He just kept losing and borrowing and promising. The pain in their voices cut Wicasa deeper than any blade. These children had learned too young that promises could be broken and trust betrayed by those who should protect them most. It was knowledge no child should carry. The last night before he left, Clara whispered, I heard him talking to Mama. He said the inheritance money could save us all, that Grandpa and Grandma would want us to use it. But Mama said it belonged to our future, not his past mistakes. By the time Cold Creek's weathered buildings appeared through the heat haze, the storm had darkened the sky to an ominous green-black. Lightning flickered in the distance, and the first fat raindrops struck the earth with sounds like scattered gunshots. They're there. Emma pointed through the gathering gloom. Riders coming fast. 6 horsemen approached at a hard gallop, dust boiling up behind them like smoke. The leader wore a star that caught the lightning's glare. Sheriff Morrison, a decent man caught between duty and survival, in a territory where fear had replaced reason. Sheriff Morrison, Emma called, waving despite her exhaustion. It's us, we're safe. But Morrison's weathered face showed only suspicion and barely controlled violence. Behind him rode Cold Creek's hastily assembled posse, storekeepers and farmers, armed with hunting rifles and righteous fury, their eyes seeing not rescuer, but threat. Recent weeks had bathed the territory in blood. The Patterson family butchered on their homestead, their bodies mutilated and cabin burned. The widow Brennan's livestock killed and winter supplies destroyed. 2 freight wagons attacked on the main road, drivers scalped and cargo scattered to the winds. The pattern suggested Indian raiders, though any experienced tracker could see the signs of white outlaw work. That's far enough, Redskin. Morrison called, his hand resting on his gun. What are you doing with those children? He saved us. Emma shouted, but thunder swallowed her words. Bad men took us and he fought them off. Morrison's revolver cleared leather with practiced speed. Step away from those girls. I won't ask twice. Wicasa raised his hands slowly. Movements deliberate and unthreatening. He could smell fear radiating from the mounted men like heat from forge fire. Not clean battle fear, but twisted terror that saw enemies in every shadow. Sheriff, he said quietly, my name is Wicasa. These children were stolen by men who spoke of $20,000 and someone named Henderson. I killed one kidnapper, wounded another. The girls can tell you, Morrison's first shot kicked up mud at Wicasa's feet. I said, step away. No. Emma threw herself between the sheriff and her protector, small arms spread wide in desperate protection. Don't shoot him. He's good. He killed the bad men and shared his water and carried Clara when she got tired. For a heartbeat, uncertainty flickered in Morrison's eyes. The girls were clearly unharmed, their defense passionate and sincere. But more riders were arriving from town, ordinary citizens drawn by gunfire, their faces ugly with mob fever that had been building for weeks. Those the Henderson girls, someone shouted. Been missing since yesterday morning. What's that savage done to them? The crowd grew uglier by the moment, and Morrison found himself trapped between justice and political survival. Do right and risk losing control of an angry mob, or sacrifice one man to preserve fragile peace. His second shot whistled past Wicasa's ear, close enough to part his hair. Final warning, but Emma Henderson had inherited both her mother's courage and her father's stubborn streak. Instead of backing down, she grabbed Wicasa's scarred hand and squeezed tight. If you hurt him, you hurt us too, she declared with 12-year-old defiance that rang across the prairie. We won't leave him. Not ever. Morrison's third shot found its mark grazing Wikasa's left arm and drawing blood. The warrior staggered but remained standing, his face showing pain but no surprise. He had expected this, had known from the moment he chose to help white children that he was likely signing his own death warrant. But he would not flee while they still needed protection. The jail cell in Cold Creek measured 8 feet by 6 and reeked of unwashed desperation and broken dreams. Wikasa sat on the narrow cot, pressing strips torn from his shirt against the bullet wound, while angry voices rose and fell outside like storm winds building toward violence. Through the barred window, he could see torches being lit despite the afternoon light, never a good sign when reasonable men started thinking like lynch mobs. The crowd was growing, fed by fear and old hatreds that recent troubles had brought to a boil. Sheriff Morrison sat at his desk beyond the bars, methodically cleaning his service revolver while avoiding his prisoner's gaze. He was an honest man, caught in circumstances that made honesty feel like luxury he couldn't afford. "Doc Hartwell's got the girls safe," Morrison said without looking up. "They're still telling that story about you being some kind of hero." "Because it is the truth," Wikasa replied evenly. "The wounded man, did your people find him?" "Well, found him bleeding like a stuck pig 3 miles south of here. Doc patched him up, but he ain't talking much. Claims he don't remember nothing about no kidnapping." Before either could say more, boots clattered on the wooden sidewalk outside. The jail door opened to admit 3 of Cold Creek's most prominent citizens, Mayor Fitzpatrick, Dr. Hartwell, and Reverend Pike, whose fire and brimstone sermons had grown increasingly anti-Indian as tensions mounted. D. Morrison. Fitzpatrick began without preamble. "We need to discuss the current situation." The sheriff sighed and set down his cleaning kit. "Let me guess. Half the town wants to string him up without trial, other half thinks I should have shot him on sight." Dr. Hartwell stepped forward, his soft hands wringing nervously. "The Henderson girls maintain their story consistently. They insist this man rescued them from genuine kidnappers. Emma even drew me a detailed picture of the fight, showing him killing one man and wounding another." Reverend Pike's pale eyes glittered with zealous certainty. "Children can be easily confused after traumatic experiences. Who's to say this savage didn't murder his own accomplices to eliminate witnesses to his crimes?" "The girls ain't confused," Morrison replied flatly. "They know exactly what happened, and they're sticking by their version no matter what we say to them." Mayor Fitzpatrick spread his hands in practiced political gesture. "Sheriff, nobody questions your judgment or competence. But we must consider broader implications for our community. 3 families have already abandoned Cold Creek since these Indian troubles started. If people believe we cannot protect children from savage raiders—" "This man ain't no raider," Morrison interrupted. "Near as I can tell, he's just trying to mind his own business and survive in a world that don't much want him." The conversation was cut short by commotion. Outside, horses moving fast, men shouting in alarm and sudden pain. Morrison frowned and moved to the window, hand automatically checking his sidearm. "And what in hell?" He spun around, grabbing his rifle from the wall rack. Armed riders coming in hard from the south, 4 of them firing at everything that moves. The first shot shattered the jail's front window, spraying glass across the floor like deadly hail. Morrison dove behind his desk, while the 3 visitors scrambled for whatever cover they could find. Outside, the sounds of urban warfare erupted, horses screaming, pistols cracking like strings of firecrackers, men dying badly in the dusty street. "It's the gang," someone yelled from outside. "The ones who took the Henderson girls." Wikasa pressed himself against his cell's back wall as bullets began chewing holes in the wooden walls. Through the barred window, he glimpsed masked riders circling the jail like wolves around wounded prey, firing methodically at doors and windows. They had come for their captured friend, or perhaps to eliminate witnesses who could identify them. Either way, they meant to leave Cold Creek painted red with blood. Sheriff Morrison raised his head cautiously and snapped a shot through the broken window. "Where's Deputy Jenkins?" Tom's down by the livery. Mayor Fitzpatrick called back, his political composure cracking under pressure. Took a bullet in the chest, looked bad. More gunfire erupted from different directions as armed townspeople began shooting back. But these were farmers and shopkeepers' men, whose experience with violence came from slaughtering hogs and hunting deer. Their shots were wild and poorly coordinated, while the outlaws rode and fired with deadly efficiency of professional killers. The jail door burst open, and a woman rushed in, bent low to avoid bullets whistling overhead. Wicasa recognized her immediately. Mary Lou Henderson, mother of the girls he had saved. She was younger than he had expected, perhaps 32, with work-hardened hands and the kind of resilient beauty that came from facing life's trials with grace intact. Her dark hair had escaped its pins during her desperate run through the battle zone, and her simple calico dress was torn at the shoulder where a bullet had passed too close for comfort. But her brown eyes blazed with maternal fury that made grown men step back. "Where are my daughters?" She demanded, her voice cutting through chaos with authority that brooked no argument. "Safe in Doc Hartwell's storm cellar," Morrison assured her without taking his eyes off the window. "Mary Lou, you shouldn't be here. It's too dangerous." Dangerous. She laughed with bitter irony that carried years of accumulated pain. "My children were kidnapped by men working for their own father. This man saved their lives, and you threw him in jail because you were too frightened to face the truth. Now the real criminals are burning down our town. Don't you dare lecture me about danger, Sheriff." Her eyes found Wicasa through the cell bars, and he saw intelligence there, the sharp perception of a woman who had learned to read people's souls as matter of survival. "You're him," she said simply. "The one Emma and Clara keep talking about. The warrior who fought 5 armed men to protect them." Wicasa inclined his head slightly. "Your daughters have courage beyond their years, Mrs. Henderson. They tried to shield me when grown men would not listen to reason or evidence. And now I'm going to shield you." She turned to Morrison with determination that made the sheriff involuntarily step backward. "Give me those keys, Sheriff. Right now." "Mary Lou, I can't just release a prisoner without proper. Those outlaws came here to kill witnesses." She interrupted, her voice cutting like steel. "That includes him, and it includes my girls if they can find them. We need every gun we can get, and he's the only man here who's actually faced these killers in open combat." A tremendous crash shook the building as something heavy, probably a freight wagon, smashed into the jail's side wall. Someone outside screamed in mortal agony, the high wail of a man dying slowly and badly. Then came the hungry crackle of flames, taking hold of dry wood and spreading fast. "Jesus and Mary." Dr. Hartwell whispered, his face pale as parchment. "They're burning the whole town." Mary Lou grabbed Sheriff Morrison by his shirt front, her calloused fingers digging into the fabric with surprising strength born of desperation and righteous anger. "The keys, Sheriff. Now, or we all die in here like rats in a trap." Morrison hesitated for exactly 1 heartbeat. Then another building exploded into flame somewhere down the street, and he tossed her the key ring with a curse that would have scandalized his Baptist mother. She unlocked Wicasa's cell just as the jail's rear wall erupted in splinters and gun smoke. A masked rider had circled around to attack from behind, firing through the back window with deadly accuracy that spoke of military training. Wicasa tackled Mary Lou to the floor as bullets whined overhead, then rolled and came up with Morrison's spare pistol in his scarred hands. His first shot took the rider's center mass, punching him backward off his horse in a spray of blood and gun smoke that painted the jail's rear wall crimson. "This way," Mary Lou said, grabbing his wounded arm with gentle urgency. "There's a back exit through Morrison's private quarters." She led him through a door he hadn't noticed, the entrance to the sheriff's modest living space behind the jail proper. They slipped out through a rear window while gun battle raged in front, moving quickly through Cold Creek's maze of alleys and storage buildings toward the relative safety of the town's northern edge. Behind them, their community was transforming into vision of hell on earth. 6 buildings now burned like massive torches against the storm-dark sky, their flames painting low-hanging clouds, orange and crimson. Men ran in every direction, some fighting fires with bucket brigades, others hunting the outlaws who struck like lightning and vanished into smoke and shadow. Bodies lay scattered in the muddy street where the brief, vicious battle had claimed its toll, some outlaws, but too many townspeople who had simply been in wrong place when violence erupted like a prairie fire. "How many of them are there?" Mary Lou asked as they pressed themselves against the side of Grain's silo, breathing hard from their desperate flight. "I killed one at their camp yesterday." Wicasa replied, checking his appropriated pistol's loads with practiced efficiency. "Wounded another, the man your sheriff has locked up. That leaves 4, maybe 5 still riding and very dangerous. Against the whole town, against townspeople who have never faced professional killers." Wicasa said grimly, his warrior's experience showing in dark eyes that had seen too much death. "The outlaws have surprise mobility and desperation of men with nothing left to lose. That combination makes them extremely dangerous opponents." As if summoned by his words, another building burst into flame at the far end of Main Street. Someone was screaming for help from inside, trapped by fallen timbers and rising smoke that would kill as surely as bullets. "My girls," Mary Lou said urgently, maternal instinct overriding everything else. "We have to get to them before—" She never finished the sentence. A rifle bullet spanged off the metal silo inches from her head, and there he stood, Bart, the scarred outlaw who had escaped the previous day. His left arm hung useless in a makeshift sling where Wicasa's arrow had found its mark, but his right hand held a Winchester steady as death itself. "Oh, well, well," he snarled, his voice thick with pain and whiskey-fueled rage. "Look what crawled out of the woodwork. The breed who cost me 2 good men and the woman whose inheritance money's gonna make me rich as a cattle baron." Wicasa stepped protectively in front of Mary Lou, his captured pistol trained on Bart's chest, despite the weakness growing in his wounded arm. "Your quarrel is with me alone. Let her walk away unharmed. My quarrel's with anybody who interfered with Henderson's plan." Bart spat his fevered eyes, never wavering from his targets. "Starting with you, then, her, then those brats she calls daughters. $20,000 buys a lot of revenge, and I mean to collect every penny." The standoff stretched for heartbeats that felt like hours while gun battle raged around them. Rain was beginning to fall in earnest, now turning dust to mud and adding the hiss of water on flames to Cold Creek's symphony of destruction. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang frantically, not calling people to worship, but sounding alarm for community under siege. Then Mary Lou Henderson surprised everyone, including herself, by grabbing a fist-sized rock and hurling it with all her strength at Bart's wounded shoulder. The stone struck home with wet thud that tore open barely healed flesh and sent fresh blood streaming down his arm. He screamed and staggered backward, his rifle shot going wild as agony spoiled his aim completely. Wicasa's bullet took him between the eyes before he could recover, ending his part in this bloody drama with brutal finality. They found Emma and Clara huddled in Dr. Hartwell's storm cellar, along with half-dozen other families who had sought shelter from violence above. The underground room was crowded and stuffy, lit by flickering oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on earthen walls lined with preserved foods and emergency supplies. "Mama." Both girls flew into Mary Lou's arms with cries of relief and joy that echoed strangely in confined space. She held them close, breathing in their familiar scent and feeling their small hearts beating against her chest, like captured birds desperate for freedom. "Are you hurt?" she asked, running gentle hands over them to check for injuries that might not be immediately visible. "Did anyone touch you, or—" "We're fine." Emma assured her, though her voice carried new shadows that hadn't been there 2 days ago. Dr. Hartwell got us down here as soon as shooting started. But Mama, what about our friend? She looked toward Wicasa, who stood near the cellar entrance with his captured pistol ready and alert. He's staying with us, Mary Lou said simply, her tone brooking no argument from anyone present. He's going to help us get through this nightmare. Dr. Hartwell emerged from Shadow's medical bag in one hand and double-barreled shotgun in other. Half the town's burning, he reported grimly, his usual professional calm cracking under pressure. Morrison's trying to organize proper defense. But these aren't ordinary bandits or drifters. They know exactly what they're doing and why. How many buildings lost? Mary Lou asked with sinking heart. 7, maybe 8 so far. The general store's gone completely along with the church and grain warehouse. If this continues much longer, there won't be enough of Cold Creek left to defend or rebuild. Wicasa studied the frightened faces around him in lamplight families who had fled their homes with nothing but clothes on their backs, children who would carry memories of this night for the rest of their lives, good people caught in crossfire of someone else's greed and betrayal, paying price for crimes they hadn't committed. They will not stop until they accomplish what they came for, he said quietly, his voice carrying certainty born of hard experience. This attack is not random violence. It has purpose. Which is what exactly? Dr. Hartwell asked, though his expression suggested he already suspected the answer. Mary Lou's face had gone pale with terrible understanding that was settling over her like cold fog. Me. They want me and the money they think I have access to. The cellar fell silent, except for distant sounds of gunfire and crackling flames filtering down through wooden ceiling. Even the children seemed to sense that something momentous was happening above them, something that would change all their lives forever. There's something I should have told you girls long ago. Mary Lou continued gathering Emma and Clara closer, while her voice remained steady despite tears beginning to flow. About your father. About why those men really took you yesterday. Emma's young face hardened with emotions far too mature for 12 years. Papa's behind all this, isn't he? I heard one of them say his name when they were planning. Mary Lou nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks as she forced herself to speak truth she had hidden for 2 years. Your father owes money to very dangerous men, sweetheart. Gambling debts from his time in White River, more money than we ever imagined could exist. When he couldn't pay them back, they threatened to kill him unless he found another way to settle his accounts completely. Clara's brown eyes were wide with confusion and growing hurt. But Papa doesn't have any money, Mama. That's why he left us in the first place. No, precious one. But I do. Mary Lou's voice grew heavy with guilt she had carried alone for too long. The inheritance my parents left me, the $20,000 I've been saving for your education and our farm's future, your father told these criminals about every penny. He promised them half of it if they could force me to pay all his debts. The silence that followed was broken only by Clara's quiet sobbing and muffled sounds of destruction from above their heads. Other families in the cellar pressed themselves against far walls, trying to escape contamination of such intimate betrayal and family shame. But the outlaws got greedy once they learned the full amount. Mary Lou continued, her voice growing stronger with determination, to finish this confession. They decided it would be easier to kidnap you girls and demand the entire $20,000 as ransom. That way they wouldn't have to share anything with your father or honor any previous agreements. Emma pulled away from her mother's embrace, her 12-year-old face twisted with pain and rage that aged her beyond recognition. So, Papa sold us like cattle at market auction. Emma, please try to understand. No. The girl's voice cracked like whip across the cellar. Don't make excuses for him. He's not our father anymore. Real fathers don't trade their children's lives to pay gambling debts. Real fathers protect their families instead of destroying them. Before Mary Lou could respond, New sounds reached them through the cellar's wooden ceiling, hoofbeats, approaching at measured pace, men calling out orders in voices that carried across the burning town with deadly authority and cruel confidence. "They're coming," Wicasa said grimly, checking his weapon one final time. Time to leave this place. The abandoned Silver Camp lay 3 miles northeast of Cold Creek, a collection of weathered shacks and rusted mining equipment left behind when claims played out 5 years earlier. Mary Lou had led them there through network of cattle trails and dry washes moving by moonlight and desperate hope, while sounds of battle gradually faded behind them. Now they huddled in the largest surviving structure, a one-room cabin that had once housed the mine's foreman during more prosperous times. Emma and Clara pressed close to their mother, while Wicasa stood guard at the single window, his rifle ready despite weakness growing in his wounded arm. The bullet graze was healing cleanly under Mary Lou's careful ministrations, but infection still threatened and fever touched his forehead with fingers of fire that reminded him of his own mortality. He could feel strength ebbing like water from cracked vessel, but forced himself to remain alert and ready. These people depended on him, and he would not fail them as he had failed his own family at Wounded Knee. "They'll come at first light," he said quietly, his warrior's experience reading the patterns of such hunts. "Your husband will not give up while you represent his only hope of staying alive and paying his debts." Mary Lou tightened her arms around her daughters, drawing what comfort she could from their small, warm bodies in the cold darkness. "How long do we have to prepare?" "A few hours at most. They'll want good light for final confrontation. Men like Henderson prefer to see their targets clearly when money and survival are at stake." The wait that followed was perhaps hardest thing any of them had ever endured. Clara eventually cried herself to exhausted sleep, despite danger, her small body overwhelmed by terror and trauma beyond her years. Emma remained stubbornly awake, staring into darkness, while trying to reconcile the father she remembered with Monster who had orchestrated their kidnapping for money. "I used to dream he'd come back someday," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the cabin's oppressive silence. "I used to imagine him riding up to our farm with presents and apologies, saying he'd won enough money gambling to take care of us forever." "What do you dream about now?" Mary Lou asked gently, stroking her daughter's tangled hair with tender fingers. "Now I dream that Wicasa kills him before he can hurt anyone else we care about," Emma replied with bitter wisdom no child should possess. "Is that wrong of me, Mama? Is it evil to want your own father dead?" Mary Lou felt something break inside her chest, not her heart, which had shattered long ago, but the last fragile hope that her family might emerge from this nightmare with some innocence intact and futures unburdened by such terrible knowledge. "Emma, don't tell me he's still my father." The girl interrupted fiercely, her young voice carrying steel that would have impressed seasoned warriors. "Don't tell me I have to love him or forgive him because we share blood. He stopped being my father the moment he decided his gambling debts were more important than his children's lives and safety." From his position at window, Wicasa spoke without turning around, his voice carrying hard-won wisdom of man who had seen too much death. "Hatred poisons the one who carries it, more than the one who deserves it, a little sister. Then what should I feel?" Emma demanded her question, carrying desperation of child trying to make sense of adult betrayals. "What's left when love dies and trust is broken forever? Sadness for what was lost." The warrior replied, simply, his words measured and carefully chosen. "And determination to protect what remains of value in this world." Dawn came gray and cold, bringing with it the sound they had all been dreading, horses moving slowly through scrub brush and rocky ground, and their riders taking time. Now that end was finally in sight. Wicasa counted at least 5 distinct sets of hoofbeats, which meant John Henderson had recruited additional help during the night, probably offering shares of the 20,000 to desperate men. "How many do you count?" Mary Lou asked, though she dreaded answers she knew was coming. 5, maybe 6 riders total. Wicasa checked his rifle's remaining ammunition, counting cartridges, that would have to stretch further than seemed mathematically possible. They're being very careful now, approaching like hunters who know their prey is cornered and dangerous. The first voice that reached them across the morning air was painfully, mockingly familiar. John Henderson's practiced gambler's drawl, still smooth and confident, despite everything that had happened in past 2 days. "Mary Lou, darling, I know you can hear me out there. Why don't you come outside so we can discuss this situation like civilized, reasonable people?" Emma's small hands clenched into fists that would have done credit to seasoned fighters. Civilized. He calls kidnapping children and burning towns civilized behavior. John continued his one-sided conversation, his tone growing more strained and desperate with each unanswered call. "Now, see here, Mary Lou. I understand you're upset about the misunderstanding with our girls. But nobody got seriously hurt in all this, did they? Everything's worked out fine in the end. Just give me what I need to clear my debts, and we can all go back to our normal, peaceful lives." Normal. Clara had awakened and was staring toward the window with eyes that looked far too old and knowing for 10 years of life. How can anything ever be normal after what he's done to us? Mary Lou felt rage building inside her like pressure in boiler. Not hot fury that burned out quickly, but cold, implacable anger of mother whose children had been betrayed by their own father for money. "John Henderson," she called back through the cabin's thin walls. "Come close enough so I can see your coward's face. I want to look in your eyes when I tell you exactly what I think of your normal life." A pause filled with tension. Then, "Still got that sharp tongue and fiery spirit, I see. Always did admire that about you, darling, even when it got you in trouble with proper folks." He rode into view moments later, still maintaining theatrical gestures and false charm that had once won her heart and hand in marriage. At 47, John Henderson remained handsome in superficial way of professional gamblers and confidence artists. His clothes were expensive despite travel dust and recent hardships. His mustache perfectly waxed his smile, as empty and meaningless as his promises had always been. Behind him rode 4 of most dangerous-looking men Mary Lou had ever seen, not crude desperados or drunken drifters, but professional killers with flat eyes and steady hands that spoke of military training and years of violence. Whatever John owed it was serious enough to warrant hiring expertise that didn't come cheap or leave witnesses alive. "You're looking well, Mary Lou," he called out with genuine warmth, as if they were meeting a church social rather than climax of kidnapping plot that had torn their family apart forever. "And my daughters, Lord Almighty, how they've grown. Emma must be 13 now. And Clara looks like a little lady. They're not your daughters anymore." Mary Lou replied, with voice cold as winter stone. "You gave up that right when you decided to use them as collateral for your gambling debts and criminal schemes." John's practiced smile flickered, but didn't quite die, though something ugly showed in his eyes. "That's harsh talk, darling. You know I had no real choice in this matter. The people I owe money to, they're not the forgiving sort who accept excuses or delays. I had to find some way to satisfy them before they decided to make permanent example of me. So you chose to sacrifice your own children instead of facing consequences like a man. I chose to solve our mutual problem in a way that wouldn't leave you a widow and them orphans." John snapped his mask, finally slipping to reveal weakness and selfishness beneath polished exterior. "Do you have any idea what these men would have done to me if I hadn't found alternative arrangements? Do you want to explain to our girls why their papa died screaming in some back alley?" From inside the cabin, Emma's voice carried clearly across the morning air, steady and cold as winter wind across empty prairie. "We know exactly what you are now, John Henderson. You're not our father, you're just a coward who sells children to pay his debts and save his worthless skin." The hurt that flashed across John's face might have been genuine pain of man who had gambled away everything that mattered, and only now realized true cost of his choices and betrayals. But it was quickly replaced by something harder, more desperate, and infinitely more dangerous. That savage has been filling their heads with poison against their own blood. He said to Mary Lou, his voice taking on wheedling tone she remembered from worst days of their marriage. Don't worry about it, darling. We'll correct their thinking once this unpleasant business is concluded and we're all together again. The only business here is justice for what you've done. Wicasa said, stepping into cabin's doorway with his rifle ready despite growing weakness in his limbs. You betrayed your own blood for money and selfish gain. In any culture worth a name that makes you less than human. John's hand drifted toward his pistol, then stopped as he remembered rifle pointed at his chest and professional killers watching from horseback. Big words from a dead man walking. Perhaps I will die today. Wicasa replied with calm acceptance that came from years of warfare and survival. But I will die with honor intact, while you must live with knowledge of what you've become, assuming you live through this at all. The standoff stretched for long minutes, while both sides took each other's measure, and storm clouds gathered overhead. Then one of John's hired guns, grizzled veteran with cavalry scars, and killer's eyes spoke with professional interest and cold calculation. That's a Winchester 73 he's holding there. Fine weapon if you know how to use it proper. Question is, Indian, how much ammunition you got left for this fight? Wicasa's smile was cold as winter wind across frozen battlefield. Enough for what needs doing. What followed was most savage gunfight in Cold Creek County's bloody history. Desperate battle that raged across mining camp like wildfire, consuming everything in its path. John's hired killers opened with coordinated volleys designed to pin Wicasa down while they maneuvered for better positions and cleaner shots. But Lakota warrior had not survived 3 decades of frontier warfare by following other men's rules or expectations. Instead of taking cover as they expected, he charged directly at them, his rifle speaking with deadly precision, despite fever and growing weakness from his wounds. His first shot took the ex-cavalryman through heart, dropping him like felled tree before he could fire second round. His second shot shattered another gunman's shoulder, spinning him around and ruining his aim forever, while he screamed in pain. But return fire was coming from multiple directions, now bullets whining past his ears and kicking up dirt at his feet as he moved and fought with desperate efficiency. Inside the cabin, Mary Lou made decision that would define rest of her life and her daughter's futures. Instead of cowering with Emma and Clara as expected, she grabbed spare pistol Wicasa had given her and joined fight with grim determination born of maternal fury. Stay down low, she yelled to her daughters while checking her weapons loads. Whatever happens up here, keep your heads down and don't watch this. Her first shot missed its intended target, but forced one gunman to dive behind rusted ore cart, spoiling his carefully aimed shot at Wicasa. Her second shot was guided by desperate mother's rage and years of shooting rabbits for family pot. It took the man's center mass and dropped him writhing in alkaline dust. The battle raged with incredible intensity for what felt like hours, but probably lasted less than 20 minutes of concentrated violence. When gun smoke finally began to clear, 3 of John's hired killers were dead or dying, and 4th was crawling away with shattered spine, leaving crimson trail in rocky ground. That left only John Henderson himself crouched behind pile of mining timbers with his pistol trained on cabin, where his former family waited in terror and defiant courage. Mary Lou, he called, his voice cracking with desperation and dawning madness of cornered animal. I've got bullets enough to kill all 3 of you. Is that really how you want this family story to end? You won't shoot your own daughters. She replied, though her voice carried more desperate hope than real certainty. Won't I? John's laugh was ugly as broken glass cutting flesh. They're worthless to me now. They'll never forgive what I've done, and they'll spend rest of their lives telling everyone what monster their father became. Better they die still thinking I loved them than live knowing I destroyed everything we ever had together. The twisted logic was probably sincere, coming from a man who had rationalized every terrible decision he'd ever made through years of gambling and betrayal. Mary Lou felt ice forming in her chest as she realized John might actually be desperate and selfish enough to murder his own children rather than face consequences of his choices and failures. Then Emma Henderson did something that surprised everyone present, including herself. She stood up in cabin's doorway, completely exposing herself to her father's loaded gun, and spoke with all moral authority of innocence, betrayed but not broken. "Go ahead and shoot Papa," she said with voice that carried across the mining camp like bell-tolling funeral. "Prove to everyone what kind of man you really are. Show them that John Henderson would rather murder his own daughters than admit he was wrong about anything." The pistol in John's hand wavered as his finger tightened on trigger, his face showing desperate war between self-preservation and whatever paternal love still survived in his corrupted soul. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite cool morning air. "Emma, get down!" Mary Lou screamed, starting toward her daughter. No, Mama," Emma replied, without moving or taking her eyes off her father's face. "If he's going to kill us for money, I want him to look us in the eye when he does it. I want him to see exactly what he's destroying with his greed." For one terrible moment that stretched like eternity, it seemed John might actually pull trigger and end his daughters' lives to cover his crimes. Then Clara appeared beside her sister in doorway, small and fragile, but equally determined. "Do it, Papa," she said in voice barely above whisper, but carrying clearly in morning stillness. "If money matters more than we do, just shoot us and take Mama's inheritance. But you'll have to look at us when you do." Something finally shattered inside man who had once been their father, some last fragment of decency or human feeling that couldn't quite be destroyed by years of selfishness and betrayal. "I can't," he whispered, gun falling from nerveless fingers to clatter on rocky ground. "Dear God in heaven, what have I become? What have I done to my own family?" In that instant of weakness and realization, Mikasa put bullet through his heart. John Henderson toppled backward with look of genuine surprise on his face, as if he couldn't quite believe his string of bad luck and worse choices had finally run out completely. His body hit ground with sound, like sack of grain dropping, and morning fell silent, except for wind through abandoned mining equipment and distant cry of circling hawk. Sheriff Morrison and his enlarged posse arrived 2 hours later, following gunsmoke and vulture flights across empty grassland dotted with sage and scattered bones. They found survivors sitting in shade of mine office, sharing water and jerky, while they waited for world to make sense again after so much violence and revelation. Emma and Clara had not cried when their father died before their eyes. They had held each other close and watched his life drain away, with expressions too complex for children's, not joy exactly, but something like relief mixed with grief for man he might have been if he'd made different choices. "It's over," Mary Lou said as Morrison surveyed carnage with weary lawman's eyes that had seen too much death and betrayal. All of it. John, the debts, the fear, and running. It's finally finished forever. Morrison nodded grimly while his men gathered weapons and counted bodies with professional efficiency. "Reckon it is finished, Mary Lou. Question now is what happens next for all of you." The question hung in air like smoke from cold chimneys, heavy with implications for all their futures in territory, where racial tensions ran high and communities needed scapegoats for their troubles. Mikasa had killed 5 white men in defense of white family, justifiable under any reasonable law. But laws didn't always matter when people wanted someone to blame. "What happens next?" Mary Lou said firmly, meeting every man's eyes in turn without flinching or backing down. "Is that we go home and get on with building our lives together. All of us as family." She was looking directly at Mikasa when she spoke, her meaning clear to anyone with sense enough to see it and wisdom to understand what she was offering. Morrison studied this exchange with calculating eyes of politician who had learned to read people's true intentions for his own survival. "Mary Lou, you absolutely sure about this course?" Some folks in town are still mighty jumpy about Indian troubles and mixing races. Having him around permanent might cause problems you haven't considered. Then people will have to learn to live with their problems and adjust their thinking. She replied with steel in her voice that brooked no argument from anyone present. This man saved my daughter's lives and helped me survive when my own husband tried to have us all murdered for insurance money. Anyone who has problem with that arrangement can discuss it with me personally and directly. The ride back to Cold Creek was quiet, except for wagon wheels creaking and soft conversation between Emma and Clara as they processed everything that had happened to their family. They were different now, aged by violence and betrayal in ways that would mark them forever, but also strengthened by knowledge that they had faced worst possible betrayal and survived it intact with dignity. Wicasa rode beside their wagon despite persistent weakness in his limbs and fever still burning in his blood like slow fire. The wounded arm was healing cleanly under Mary Lou's careful ministrations, but it would be weeks before he regained full strength and mobility. No matter, he had survived worse injuries in his years as warrior, and this one came with satisfaction of justice served and innocence protected from those who would harm them. Cold Creek itself bore scars of previous days' battle like badges of honor earned through suffering and survival. 7 buildings had been completely destroyed by fire, and Main Street was littered with debris from gun battles and desperate flight. But townspeople were already hard at work clearing wreckage and planning reconstruction with pragmatic resilience of frontier communities that learned early that survival meant adapting to disaster and moving forward regardless of setbacks or losses. The welcome they received was notably different from Wicasa's previous visit to their community. Instead of suspicious stares and hostile mutters, people nodded respectfully as they passed, some even removing hats in gesture of genuine gratitude. Word of his heroism had spread with speed of prairie fire, and public opinion had shifted with practical wisdom of community that valued results over prejudice when survival was at stake. Mayor Fitzpatrick waited on steps of temporary town hall, actually the barbershop since real building had burned, with prepared speech about heroism and justice that managed to avoid mentioning his earlier willingness to sacrifice innocent man to mob rule for political expedience on behalf of Cold Creek's grateful citizens. He declared with practiced political sincerity that fooled no one but sounded appropriately official. I want to publicly apologize for the regrettable misunderstanding regarding our friend here. His heroic actions defending our community will not be forgotten, and we sincerely hope he'll consider making his home among us on permanent basis. It was pretty speech full of empty words that said little while promising even less. But Wicasa accepted it with grace of man, who understood that politicians lived in different worlds from warriors and survivors. What mattered was not speeches, but safety they represented for Mary Lou and her daughters. Dr. Hartwell insisted on thoroughly examining his wounds and changing all bandages, clucking disapprovingly over infection that had nearly claimed his life during recent battles. You're extremely fortunate to be breathing, the physician observed as he worked with professional competence. Another day or two without proper medical treatment and we'd be planning funeral instead of celebration. My people believe death comes when it's destined to. Wicasa replied with philosophical acceptance. Apparently my time has not yet arrived on this earth. God willing, you'll have many more years ahead of you. What will you do now? Return to your tribe or reservation? Wicasa glanced toward Mary Lou, who stood with her daughters outside doctor's office, watching him through window with expression he couldn't quite read, hope mixed with uncertainty, gratitude tempered by fear of presuming too much about his intentions. I have not decided my future yet, he said carefully. There are important considerations to weigh before making such choices. That evening, as sunset painted western sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Mary Lou Henderson walked out to old cottonwood behind her farmhouse, where Wicasa sat methodically cleaning his rifle. Emma and Clara were inside preparing supper together, their voices audible through open kitchen window as they argued good-naturedly about proper seasoning and cooking times, with comfortable familiarity of family routine restored. They're different now, Mary Lou observed, settling onto a wooden bench that had somehow survived all recent chaos and destruction. Changed by what they've seen and experienced. Yes, they are changed. Wicasa agreed, continuing his careful maintenance of weapons that had saved their lives. But they are not broken by it. There is real strength in them. Both they will grow into remarkable women with wisdom beyond their years. Thanks to you and your protection. The strength was already there, waiting to be discovered, he corrected gently. I simply helped them find it when circumstances demanded courage from everyone. They sat in comfortable silence, while first stars began appearing in darkening sky, each lost in private thoughts about past violence and uncertain future possibilities stretching ahead. Finally, Mary Lou spoke words that had been building inside her for days. I've been thinking seriously about what kind of future I want to build for Emma and Clara, and for myself. And what have you decided? That I don't want to build it alone anymore. She turned to face him fully, her brown eyes reflecting last light of day. I know this is highly unconventional by any measure. I know there will be people who disapprove strongly, and probably members of your own tribe who won't understand such choices. But I don't care about any of that anymore. Wicasa set down his rifle and gave her his complete focused attention, sensing great importance of this moment for all their futures. I'm saying that in space of just 4 days, you've shown me more genuine honor and courage than my husband did in 10 years of marriage. She continued with growing confidence. I'm saying my daughters trust you more completely than they ever trusted their own father. And I'm saying that if you're willing to take on ready-made family with more problems than obvious advantages, I would be deeply honored to have you as my husband. The proposal hung between them like morning mist, fragile and precious, and liable to disappear if not handled with proper care and respect. Wicasa felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, not sudden lightning of romantic passion, but deeper, steadier warmth of recognition and possibility. Here was woman who had faced ultimate betrayal and deadly violence with her courage and dignity intact. Here were children who had looked at him and seen protector rather than enemy to be feared. Here was genuine chance to build something new and meaningful from ashes of 2 lives broken by loss and betrayal. Mary Lou. He began, then stopped as Emma and Clara came running from house with obvious excitement written across their faces. Are you asking him to marry us? Emma demanded with 12-year-old directness that cut straight to heart of important matters without adult games or pretense. Emma, her mother protested with embarrassment. You shouldn't have been listening at windows to private conversations. Of course we were listening. Clara interrupted with 10-year-old logic that brooked no argument. It's about our family's future, isn't it? We should definitely have say in such important family decisions. Wicasa found himself smiling at their forthright honesty, so refreshingly different from adult games of hint and subtle suggestion that accomplished nothing. And what do you say about this possibility, little sisters? We say yes, absolutely. Emma replied without slightest hesitation. We talked about it last night after you carried Clara to bed when she fell asleep. We want you to be our new papa, our real papa this time, who won't abandon us. Clara nodded vigorously, bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement. Will you teach us to shoot arrows like you do, and how to track animals through different terrains, and speak proper Lakota words, and all the other important things Lakota children learn from their fathers? Lakota children. Wicasa corrected, gently, appreciating her genuine interest. And yes, if that is truly what you wish to learn, I will teach you everything I can. He stood and took Mary Lou's work-calloused hands in his own scarred ones, feeling strength there that spoke of hard choices and harder survival against overwhelming odds. In my people's culture, marriage joins not just two people, but two families, two complete ways of life and thinking. Are you truly prepared for such challenges and changes? I'm prepared for whatever comes our way, she replied with quiet conviction. As long as we face it together as true family, then yes, Mary Lou Henderson. I will marry you with honor, and I will be devoted father to your daughters, and together we will build something good and lasting from wreckage of what came before us all. The wedding took place 3 weeks later in Cold Creek's newly rebuilt church, with most of town in respectful attendance and remainder pretending they had more pressing concerns elsewhere. Reverend Pike, visibly swallowing his earlier prejudices with considerable effort, performed ceremony with dignity, if not obvious enthusiasm. Emma and Clara served as joint maids of honor, wearing matching blue dresses that Mary Lou had sewn from fabric purchased with reward money the grateful community had pooled together for Wikasa's heroic actions. Sheriff Morrison stood as best man, having developed genuine respect for Warrior, who had helped save his town from destruction and his own reputation from complete failure. The reception was modest, but genuinely heartfelt community celebration that marked not just marriage, but symbolic healing of old wounds and prejudices. There were still some sour faces, and crowds still whispered comments about mixing races and cultures in ways that defied tradition. But there were also many genuine smiles and firm handshakes and sincere wishes for happiness from people who had learned firsthand that character mattered more than skin color when survival and protection of innocence was at stake. As evening wore on and guests began drifting away to their own homes and concerns, Mary Lou found herself standing beside her new husband on church steps, watching last light fade from western sky, while marveling at how completely their lives had transformed in span of single, violent week. "Any regrets about this choice?" she asked quietly, studying his profile in gathering darkness. Wikasa considered question with characteristic seriousness, weighing his words carefully. A man cannot regret following path that leads to honor, protection of innocence, and genuine family. This marriage feels right in ways I cannot fully explain to anyone, including myself, even though it means completely leaving your old life behind forever. My old life was already gone, scattered like ashes on prairie wind by war and loss. He replied with peaceful acceptance. This is not abandonment of anything meaningful. This is conscious choice of something new and precious beyond measure. They walked home together through quiet streets of Cold Creek, Emma and Clara chattering excitedly about expansion plans for their farm and animals they would raise and adventures they would share as complete family unit. Behind them, the town settled into peaceful sleep, secure in knowledge that tomorrow would bring ordinary challenges of frontier life, rather than extraordinary violence they had recently survived together. 2 years passed with surprising swiftness. Their son Samuel was born healthy and strong, beautiful infant, with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined chin and bright spirit. They gave him middle name Joaquinyan, meaning thunder in Lakota language, bridging two worlds in a way that seemed completely natural for their blended family. Emma and Clara thrived under Wikasa's patient guidance, learning to track game and identify edible plants alongside traditional feminine skills their mother continued teaching. Both girls became fluent in Lakota as well as English, creating bridges between communities that had been suspicious enemies for too long. The farm itself prospered under their combined efforts and different kinds of knowledge. Wikasa's understanding of weather patterns and soil conditions complemented Mary Lou's practical experience with crops and livestock management. They expanded steadily, adding cattle and horses, building new structures that reflected both cultures' best architectural wisdom. Cold Creek accepted them with gradual but genuine warmth that grew stronger with each passing season. Initial suspicion and prejudice gave way to respect and appreciation as townspeople recognized that Wikasa's presence made their entire community safer and more prosperous through his various contributions. On their second wedding anniversary, Mary Lou made final entry in personal journal she had kept since childhood. 2 years ago, I believed my life was effectively over, that John's betrayal had destroyed any possibility for happiness, security, or hope for my daughter's futures. I was completely wrong about everything important. Wicasa didn't just save Emma and Clara from kidnappers that terrible day. He saved all of us from despair and hopelessness. He showed my girls that men could be trusted to protect rather than exploit, that strength could be gentle, and courage could be kind without weakness. He showed me that love could grow from mutual respect and gratitude into something deeper and more lasting than passion alone, true partnership that strengthens both people involved rather than diminishing either. Our son Samuel will grow up knowing that families are built on choice and commitment rather than blood alone, that different cultures can blend beautifully to create something stronger than either could achieve separately. This is legacy I want to leave, living proof that understanding can triumph over fear, that love can bridge any divide if people are brave enough to try with their whole hearts. The journal remained on their mantelpiece for decades afterward, testament to love. Story born from violence, but nurtured by patience, wisdom, and unshakable commitment to building something better from broken pieces of the past. It was in the end the only legacy that truly mattered to any of them.